So my name's Eric Helms, and so I'm really just a guy who likes lifting weights and really likes the science behind it and has a passion for helping people who have the same passion as me find balance and also progress at the same time in their life.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, I don't know how much background I want to get into, but I've been lifting things since 2004. Made this a profession right around 2005 as just a fitness staff in the local YMCA, and have taken it as far as I could. Mm-hmm. Got a little pro card in a national organization.
Right.
I've competed and done pretty well in powerlifting. I have like a 400 Wilks score, so that's like in powerlifting, like you lift. Mm-hmm. It's not even just like in the gym you lift, like I lift in powerlifting. So I'm pretty good. And so reasonably well as an athlete, mostly just from hard work and putting in 11 years. And then as a coach, I've gone from personal trainer to starting 3D Muscle Journey with Alberto, Jeff, Brad in 2009, and bringing on Andrea and most recently. And I'd say we're about trying to support the drug-free lifting community as a whole, and helping people to find a way to make bodybuilding enhance their lives rather than potentially detract from it.
Right. I think there might be some value in having more of a personal discussion about how you tick. This really interests me because I find you the most impressive person I know of in the fitness industry, given how much you get. Yeah, he paid me to say this, but how much you give, and seemingly not even like way beyond what is necessary or appropriate. Like if you were to do tremendously less, that would be great. So
that's good to know. So I can don't have to work as hard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, retire. Yeah. So when you get up in the morning, what is your internal dialogue as to?
I think the 3 years I spent as a serial killer, I've still got a lot of karma to pay off. So I'm just gonna to be honest, I probably just think some normal random BS. But yeah, I mean, when I guess what you're getting at is what is this world coming to? I guess what you're getting at is what makes me tick, or why do I do what I do?
Right.
I honestly enjoy helping people, and I think to get introspective, I think I found that the connections I developed in bodybuilding were some of the most valuable to me as a person in terms of my own development and growth. And I guess you phrased it as I give a lot to the sport. I feel like I'm giving a lot back to the sport.
Interesting.
So as weird and meta as it sounds, I felt like I was able to get self-actualized through the process of contest prep. Like seeing, okay, this is something incredibly hard to do. It's a huge barrier in my life. I don't think I can progress past this. And then pushing myself there and realizing what I was capable of. It felt like it took some of the limits off me. And it wasn't just bodybuilding, but bodybuilding happening in the course of some, rough life events. And then using that as almost like a cathartic coping tool. So I've always used bodybuilding as a way of helping me get through life. And so I feel like I owe a lot to the community. I've had a lot of people support me. So I feel like, I really want to have other people have a positive experience from it as well. And I've run into a lot of competitors who burn out after 5 years and they go, bodybuilding isn't healthy. And I think it can very easily not be healthy. So I guess I wake up in the morning and I think I want to give people choice. I want to be able to bodybuild on their terms and have it not be seen as some kind of like effort cop-out. Like we still call it, 3D Muscle Journey, like dedication, desire, discipline. Like I fully believe it's much harder to succeed in bodybuilding while having balance than it is to succeed in bodybuilding while being a social hermit or just eating a strict meal plan. Like those are actually coping tools to deal with an extremely difficult sport. It's harder to have a flexible approach, to have an auto-regulated program, to have and maintain healthy relationships when you feel like shit, don't want to, are mad at the world, and are pushing yourself to do things that are potentially unhealthy. So I kind of rail against the idea that this is like, not the hardcore approach. I think it's the I guess the path less walked among bodybuilding. It is harder to do, and if you can do it, then you can have your cake and eat it too, literally and figuratively in life in terms of food.
Right. In a webinar you did recently for Shredded by Science, I think. And terrible memory. I don't remember anything.
Yeah. SBS Academy.
I mean, I remember your name, but not mine. So.
I just try to remember my last name. I'm good. I don't know what my middle is anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's true. You're just Helms online.
There you go. And that works for me because my memory.
Yeah, excellent. You discussed the fact that a flexible approach is more difficult in a way in that it requires more in the way of education up front. So do you think some people perhaps default to the clean eating type approach, perhaps even, I'm not entirely comfortable with this phrasing, but perhaps out of laziness or something like laziness, not wanting to think beyond, okay, this is already or has always been done, it works, so I'm just going to do this, I'm going to default to what is traditional.
Yeah, I think it's also sometimes it's top down. Like there are instances, and I'll give you a really good example where it's not laziness, it's heuristics. Let's just take the diabetic exchange system.
Right.
It's like, wow, teaching people to count calories, weigh foods and all that, that's relatively difficult. Mm-hmm. But if I can encapsulate an energy balance system to someone and give them points, like Weight Watchers does,
right.
Points based on what foods I eat and their calorie value and the cardio I do, and that's, not that weight loss is very successful at all these days because of the modern environment, but Weight Watchers is one of the most successful large ones, and it's based on a heuristic system. And I think it does happen top down sometimes. A guy will be like, it is such a false paradigm to go like, flexible dieting if it fits your macros and clean eating, because in reality, before that became the argument with people trying to figure out a way of tricking people into eating in a calorie deficit to lose weight.
Right.
Because they knew that you lose so many people right at the word go when they're afraid, don't think they're smart enough, don't want to put in the effort, don't value it enough, or just don't simply understand it to be able to get over that initial hump. They say just getting in the gym for your first workout is the hardest thing. It's kind of the same thing with diet.
Right.
So if you can tell them, look, follow these 5 simple rules and this will be successful, awesome. I think it's just 90% of the time those simple rules are not always that simple, and you find a way around them, or the system doesn't effectively work. I think it's why things like low-carb dieting can be so successful for some people. It's because you simply remove one food item,
right?
And then if that positively affects your ability to eat, then boom, So it's just a way of working around things. Because flexible dieting requires so much teaching up front and the commitment, it is harder initially. It gives you freedom later, but It's an investment. So, like delayed gratification, humans aren't good at that. Never have been, So I think when people just are like, they act like it's so easy. Just like, dude, if you make it fit your macros, then you're good. And it's like, or maybe you have to actually learn what the macronutrients are, what energy balance is. You have to start reading food labels, then you have to understand how to effectively portion size. Then you go, when do I weigh foods or when do I not? Am I going to live by weighing everything for the rest of my life and tracking macros? Flexible dieting is always based on a reference point.
Right.
If you are a bodybuilder who has for the last 10 years thought you could only eat a list of 6 foods and you had to eat every 3 hours, you tell them you can eat anywhere to 3 to 6 meals a day and hit within these ranges of protein, carbs, fat, and you could fit any foods to that. Oh my God, it's like letting a guy out of prison after 20 years. But if you go up to an obese person who doesn't know the difference between a protein and a carbohydrate, you can tell them, look, you can fix this. You just have to do this, this, and this, and this. And they're like, oh my God, that's completely overwhelming. I don't know how to do that. I don't know what you're saying, and you'll lose them. And I think I made the mistake many times early in my career of trying to use that approach with someone whose reference point was way over here when I'm thinking in like a bodybuilding perspective.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I was going to say that I feel that a lot of the experts in the evidence-based community are, in a way, handicapped by how much they know and to a certain extent, simply how intelligent they are. And as a result, they will think, okay, tracking your macros takes 5 minutes a day, almost effortless.
Or an hour to do it wrong.
Right.
Exactly.
Yet the reality is there's some people who every single day they struggle. The question I had, which is related to that, is do you think tracking macros is a realistic long-term approach for most people? I mean, should people plan to be tracking their macros when they're 60 years old?
I think there was a point because of where the reference point where I started. I mean, if you'd seen my first prep, you'd understand that wow, that was really not the right way to do it, or maybe that was what the IFBB community or the broad traditional bodybuilding approach was. So to me, when I started to take that approach, it was extremely freeing. But at a certain point, I was like, I don't even know why I'm doing this anymore.
Right.
You know, I can look at a potato and I know probably within 5 grams of what it weighs, and I'm always hitting my macros if I track it or not. So is that where I'm going to stop? You know, does it end there? Right. And I think there was, because, I mean, this is such a new approach in terms of chronology. It's only been around, it literally started as a phrase to say to someone on the bodybuilding.com forums when they ask, oh, can I have this on my diet? And you go, if it fits your macros. And it got so annoying, they just made it into a phrase, and then it got exploded. So we're talking 10 years old, 15 years old maybe, you know, at most, and probably not even that,
right.
You know? So I think now that this has become a thing and it's been around for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, people are going, oh, that's not really flexible dieting. If it fits your macros is saying, does it fit your macros? But flexible dieting has inherent elements of flexibility, auto-regulation, matching it to the person. It's not just a one-size-fits-all. So no, I actually don't think the goal is to track your macros 24/7 for the rest of your life. I don't think that is a sustainable plan for 99% of people. It may be a phase that lasts for years. Like, for example, I track my macros from 2007 to 2012 on almost every day basis. I am still crazy, don't think I'm not. Right. But I just kind of, when I moved, I think it was because I was moving to New Zealand, everything was changing. I knew I wouldn't have access to normal food. So I realized, you know, like, why am I doing this? This is a perfect time to kind of start things off fresh. And I haven't tracked macros except for one study I participated in for 8 weeks,
right.
12 weeks. I haven't tracked macros since 2012.
So how much have you regressed in that period?
Well, this is me about minus 20 pounds of lean body mass.
Really?
No.
We can get into your
I
TRT.
Wish.
Yeah.
Right, just going off the PHs. I lost so much since 2005. But no, the change in mindset was really just going, you know, no matter what diet you're following, you're eating macros. They're in foods. It doesn't matter if you track them or not, or if you're trying to fit them. So the idea is that once you've eaten for years and years and years on a strict regimented plan, that should be a behavior change. There should be a behavior change that comes with that. And it wasn't just the behavior of getting on MyFitnessPal every day and getting your food scale out. There should actually be some things that you do almost automatically. You know what 50 grams of carbs looks like. You know what 50 grams of protein looks like. You know what 600 calories looks like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now I find that I don't need to be neurotic at all, but it took me years of being neurotic to be to the point where I can now auto-regulate it and I can maintain my weight year-round without an issue, where previously I didn't know how to even recognize hunger and satiety anymore until I was starving. Right.
Oh,
you lose satiety. You eat by the numbers, right?
Yeah.
So I had to relearn what hunger was, relearn what satiety was, figure out where the balance was, and then all those natural things that I had for 25 years before I got into this style of eating melded with the neuroticism of the last 6, or 5 rather, and then that blended into now I can just pretty much manipulate whatever I want to do just by feel. And I think that is a good place to get to, and I probably could have been there 4 years earlier. I just got to track the macros, you know?
Do you think most people can successfully get from really knowing nothing about nutrition to where you are without the intervening potentially years or who knows, even decades of macro tracking?
Yes, and that's actually what I'm going to be talking about in the seminar tomorrow. That's my presentation. Excellent. Is looking back, if I had to take someone green and go, all right, how do we get you from not knowing anything about nutrition and just knowing that I'm overweight and I'm gaining weight and I don't know why and I want that to change, or being a bodybuilder who thinks I eat the cut diet and I eat everything and that's my 2 on-off switches, which is a very normal bodybuilding thing. And they know more than the average person. They understand what a protein, a carb, and a fat is and what a carbohydrate is, But going from that to then eventually being like, I can look at food and look at meal sizes and think about how I'm feeling and know at different phases where I'm at and only track body weight. And just use that as a surrogate for energy balance, and then make sure that my meals are fitting the criteria which we think is in the range of optimal on the basis of information we know now. Now that doesn't mean there isn't a time and place for getting the scale out and tracking again.
Right.
There's times when your satiety signals don't operate well, and it's specifically like when you're trying to diet down. Like I don't think I could auto-regulate myself all the way to striated glutes. At a certain point, I'd be talking myself into, I'm pretty sure I need a refeed, or I'm fucking starving,
Right.
So I think there is a time and a place for it, maybe when you're starting prep. But more and more I try to do it now with my clients, is I try to get them, and a lot of it's really more of, are they comfortable with the idea, and can I get around the fear, and can I get them to trust the fact that you're ready for this? Get them to a point where they are tracking as minimal variables as possible while still making the progress we want.
Right. So this may seem to be coming out of left field, but what do you think of the extremely slow slow and strict and controlled reverse dieting approach that some people advocate, and that came to mind because it's so radically different from what you're describing of having a very strict contest prep phase, and then afterwards it's more auto-regulated. Not to say that you just get fat and do what bodybuilders have traditionally done, but certainly you wouldn't be tracking your macros every single day, adding very small quantities of carbs, whether it be every week or whatever. What do you think of the claim or the speculation that in doing this you're able to increase metabolic capacity? Ultimately you're able to increase your basal metabolism and all of this. Is this something that, from what I've seen, there's literally no literature on this. Like, it's never been studied. So we're left with...
I've done a little bit.
Oh, you have?
But
Excellent.
I'm the crazy guy who only looks at bodybuilding literature. We're talking like 1972 in a discussion talking about how they had this population and they fed them more and more carbs, and they didn't gain the amount of weight they'd expected. No hard numbers.
Interesting.
And then you've got stuff like, 1999, I think it's Levine, the adding 1,000 calories only ends up being a 400 calorie surplus kind of thing.
Right.
But I think, so there's a couple parts to your question. I'll start with what do I think about the very slow reverse dieting process. So to address what do I think of the very slow reverse dieting process, I think I'm fine with slow weight gain and slow increases in food after body fat's put on.
Right.
Because by far, the metabolic adaptation is a real thing. I think just categorizing it all as metabolic adaptation is a little bit misleading. Like, if you were to look at studies on people getting extremely lean, and there's not a whole lot, and their reduction in energy expenditure beyond what would be predicted by body weight, it can be a lot.
Right.
Like at the highest end, if you go 2 standard deviations out, you can sometimes see people dropping a third of what you'd expect. So they're only burning 2/3 of the caloric expenditure you'd expect. We're talking, this is the people who have it worst, right? And that's, if you're like, all right, you weigh 180 pounds, I think you should be burning, 2,500 calories. Oh shit, you're only burning 1,800, I guess, or whatever. 1,700. I can't do the math in my head.
Right.
But so that's real. But then to really truly call it metabolic adaptation, you have to assume that all 100% of that third, or the largest component of that third, is a drop in BMR. For it to be metabolic adaptation. And in fact, maybe it's only of that third, maybe only a third of that is actually a drop in metabolic rate. And when you look at obese people who've lost a lot of weight, it's a tiny percentage. The biggest drop and the most adaptable component of adaptive thermogenesis is actually NEAT. So non-activity energy expenditure, so things you're doing besides exercise. But even then, I'm not 100% comfortable just saying, oh, people are getting more sedentary or they're not moving as much, because so much of that is subconscious.
Right.
Like, subconscious control, things you have no control over, burning less calories while you sleep, for example, less movement while you sleep. It's not just BMR going down. And even looking at getting more efficient at the micro level. So, there's studies where they've had people lose body weight, and they figured out what happens when your arm moves when you've got all your body weight. Okay, you burn X number of calories. We'll diet you down. Okay, you burn less. Well, let's add the weight back to your arm. Oh, you still burn a little less. So there's a skeletal muscle efficiency that goes up, which affects all activity. So that you can't change that. At least I can't think of a way to modify it. You can't change the fact of your subconscious activity going down. You can replace it with more conscious activity, but that can be dicey too. Like, it's another variable you have to make someone track. They start thinking about, oh, everything I do is NEAT. Oh my God, and that can be emotionally a train wreck with someone who's already tracking macros and thinking about it, like, oh, I need to get in 10,000 steps kind of thing.
Right.
So anyway, to answer your question, the biggest thing that modifies that is not increasing food, it's increasing body fat. So I want someone, after they get off stage, to relatively quickly, but not within a binge eating approach, but letting them eat, which is going to be a lot when they're after a show and don't have satiety signals. And asking them to eat a specific amount of calories, just like I did for 6 months, and specific amount of macros, maybe a little more flexibility. Maybe they don't always have to have the scale. Maybe they can eat 1 or 2 meals out and estimate it.
Right.
So not abandoning the structure, because that's quite scary, especially when they don't want to see their body changing the way it is going to have to be beneficial. I tell them, okay, we're going to loosen up the tracking with the goal of getting less, even less rigid over time. So it is a reverse process, but the goal is, all right, we're going to be eating in a 500, 600, 700 calorie surplus day to day, trying to put on a lot of body weight. There's no reason to have striated glutes as a male unless you're going to get on bodybuilding stage. That's not ideal for mental health, physical health, or even bodybuilding.
Right.
That's not a place where you're going to put on effective muscle mass, in my opinion, for most people. So I would like to very quickly get them from, let's say 5% to 8 or 9% body fat, and then we slow it down. So at that point, then you can take that slow approach, but at that point it doesn't need to be neurotic anymore. The only reason you'd have rigid numbers is because it actually can provide a control when you don't have satiety signals. Like if you don't have any kind of structure, after having structure for 6 months and then being massively hungry and having no goal, that will result in uncontrolled binging. And for some people, that uncontrolled binging will last a couple weeks. They'll gain 10 pounds and they'll be done with it. But other people, they will overshoot. That happened to me in 2007. Drastically be unhappy and then spend the next year and a half cutting every other couple months,
Right.
which is less ideal than doing the slow-ass reverse. But you're kind of taking a really bad scenario. I don't want you to gain 50 pounds in 2 months. So instead, I want you to gain 5 pounds in 6.
Right.
From starting from stage weight. Like neither one is ideal. Sure, this may be better than that from a purely performance perspective, but I think if you look at the literature and you think about it from an emotional health standpoint and just what makes sense from living life, you want to have a gradual but relatively aggressive return to higher body fat and allow them to kind of deal with that at a good pace emotionally, talk to them, and it has to be kind of, I guess, auto-regulated to the person. But what we call it is a recovery diet, not a reverse diet, a recovery diet. The goal is to recover, right?
Interesting.
So we get them up to the low end of your quote-unquote settling point relatively quickly. We're talking 4 to 6 weeks, and then we go slow. And then once you get that point, we're working towards getting more and more. So I might have them tracking macros, eventually just protein and calories, and then hopefully, like I said, like body weight and intuitive eating, eventually.
I find this really interesting because it's very similar to the approach typically used in the case of treating patients with anorexia nervosa, in that it's pretty widely understood now that a lot of the psychological symptomology of anorexia diminishes just as a result of getting a patient up to a normal body weight. So in a clinical setting, what they will very often do is initially they just focus on refeeding. They'll even call it refeeding. But in that case, they don't mean, eating at maintenance for one day. They mean weeks and weeks and weeks of massive overfeeding. Get them to gain enough weight that a lot of the, unhealthy psychology, again, diminishes just as a function of that increased body weight. And then,
It feeds into itself.
yeah, the ball is rolling, and then it doesn't have to be imposed on the patient to the same extent in all of this. So.
And I love that you brought up anorexia nervosa, because I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've had some experience in your past with eating disorder, is that correct?
Yeah, it was extremely entertaining. One of the best phases of my life,
Yeah, right, lots of fun. But, you might have a bodybuilder who goes, look, I have to diet to get lean, but I'm not anorexic. Mm-hmm. However, if you were to diagnose a bodybuilder at the very end of their contest prep, we'll go back to the Minnesota semi-starvation study, or the clinical definition of what anorexia nervosa is. I have a feeling a lot of bodybuilders would meet it because it's based around like food preoccupation, attitudes around it. Do I need to get leaner despite being incredibly lean? So there's a lot of parallels, and the biology and the psychology get very intertwined at the point when you are extremely, extremely lean, So I think probably at least by old diagnostic criteria around the time when, at the end of the Minnesota semi-starvation study, which was in the 50s, I believe, the early 50s, late 40s, everyone at the end of the study could have been diagnosed with anorexia.
Right.
So none of them were anorexics before, but the process of dieting them down to starvation levels and keeping them in there and forcing them to it produced anorexia.
Right, so the cause and effect is the opposite of what one would expect.
They induced anorexia by dieting.
Right.
So now that's when I tell the bodybuilder, so maybe this is something that you should think about. Like, just because you have more skeletal muscle than an anorexia doesn't make you not in the same position physiologically. It actually makes it not as bad, because losing muscle mass seems to have an impact on hunger more than just losing fat, but there's a lot of parallels.
Well, I recall Lyle talking about how with regard to satiety, what was found is, in the case of the Minnesota starvation experiment, was satiety returned to normal only when all of the lost lean body mass was regained.
And fat. Both. They both played a role, but lean body mass was a big part of it.
Right.
And it's difficult to pull out the influence of each one, because the lean body mass returned after fat or concurrently with.
Right.
But yes. Yeah.
I mean, admittedly, I haven't looked at the data itself recently, but if I recall correctly, the body fat returned to normal more rapidly.
Yeah.
Satiety didn't. And
Correct.
then when lean body mass did, well,
Yeah.
okay, so I would agree. Plausibly, it's both need to
Yeah.
return
I
to
guess I'm saying is
baseline.
the satiety didn't go like that. It went like that. Does that make sense? More like a curvilinear relationship that got better as lean body mass came back, but it was still there. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Hence the fat overshoot.
right. So the fundamental principle here would be that for most people, the thought of, okay, I've competed, how can I minimize body fat gain is the wrong question, and indeed is making a goal of maintaining an unhealthy state.
Yep. And I would even say for the people who are just purely focused on, I'm not really care about health, I'm here about bodybuilding performance, I think it will actually short-term your muscle mass gains in the long run. If you spend, so I've seen some reverse dieting plans that are 4 to 6 months. If you spend 4 to 6 months to get to the low end of your set point, that's 4 to 6 months of time that is not ideal for gaining lean body mass.
Right. I've seen 18. I've repeatedly seen 18.
That's-
Now, to be clear, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, at a certain point, you are at a healthy body fat, and you're just very slowly increasing calories.
Right.
I have no problem with that. If you I do that. I have sent out add 10 grams of carbs to your intake, but the fuckers are already at 10% or 12% body
Very
fat.
disappointed. We're gonna have to end this.
We got to
interview.
cut it off right there, because I want to see them gaining at I recommend natural bodybuilders be gaining 0.5 to 1.5% of body weight per month. So I don't make large increases like I do on a
Right.
diet. If I want you to gain, a pound a month of lean body mass, I'm not going to add 500 calories right now.
Yeah.
That's a pound a week,
Yeah, with off-season clients or clients who don't compete, but they're in a lean mass phase, I very often find myself looking at what's going on. It's like really nothing needs to change.
The weight I'm paying attention to is what's on the bar, not their body weight, because it's going up so slowly. Yeah,
Right.
Exactly.
Well, that
Yeah.
actually transitions perfectly into a question that I was thinking about. Someone also asked about this on Instagram when I posted about being here, and that is, I've seen you say on Facebook, I mean, you write 5 essays a day on Facebook, and in one of these...
Oh, definitely, right?
Yeah. I mean, how just like what quantity of amphetamines do you have to be using to maintain that work ethic?
All the amphetamines.
Right. I recall you saying that I don't recall if it was advanced or intermediate and advanced trainees, but there comes a point where there isn't any point in setting up a deliberate bulking phase, and that you won't actually gain more muscle than you will if you just train hard and eat. And it was almost that exact phrase. It was something like, just train and eat.
Yeah, sometimes because I do get frustrated sometimes by. It's a self-created frustration, because I'm one of the evidence-based, nuanced, focusing on the 5% that'll optimize things, but I also try to make correct. Me and him go. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so I attract people who overanalyze. I used to be someone who overanalyzed. I, in a way, have to overanalyze, then step back and get the big picture.
Right.
So I have to remind myself not to lose too much patience with people who are asking me what I feel are questions that miss the point. So I will drastically simplify things, because I kind of need to remind people, dude, let go of the magnifying glass for a second. But yeah, here's an interesting thing. Every single study on where they just add weight training to people, they gain weight.
Right.
They don't have to tell them, I need you to eat more.
Right.
The body has a system for this. Just like we forget that we don't have to, if satiety is a real thing, we naturally regulate our body weight and the needs of our body with our internal thermometer. And, it doesn't work very well in the modern environment, like I said, but it works perfectly fine, when not bombarded by food and then the lack of need to move, right? So when you just put people in a lab environment or even in an applied lab environment where you tell them to go off and train on their own and you just make them train, they end up eating more and they gain weight. And they eat in a proportionate amount to maintain roughly their same body fat level in most cases.
Right.
Because you don't see adding a training intervention increasing body fat. Sometimes it goes down a little bit or it stays the same, but muscle mass always goes up. The same thing happens at all levels. And when you're dealing with an advanced level athlete, they already have a really good understanding of nutrition. So they're going to be doing a lot of those things that we talked about 10 minutes ago, hopefully, about putting their nutrition in an optimal place almost after intuitively doing it after years of being more neurotic. And, if they're going to be, a great example would be like Brian Whitaker, his physique has definitely improved since he first got on the world stage in like 2005 or something like that. He just won the WNBF Worlds. 8 years later, I think his stage weight is up like a pound or two.
0.2 pounds or something.
Right. He's leaner this time, so you can make an argument that maybe he's gained 3, 4, 5 pounds of lean body mass in 13 years. Or, sorry, 8 years. Right. So how the fuck do you track that? What am I going to track 10 grams per week or something like that? It doesn't make any sense. So to me, it's kind of like, right, don't cut back on your food. Eat as much as you feel you need to. Make sure you're in the ballpark where we want to be. If at the end of the year you're a couple pounds up, or if you're gaining a pound a month, that's fine. We'll mini cut every 6 to 8 months, something like that. But focusing on intentionally making the scale go up, it's going to be an amount, even if we did do that, that's within like just the standard variation, even across a month of averages.
Right.
So don't worry about it. Let's progress in the gym. There's got to be some way that you're getting stronger. And it's probably at least partially related to morphological adaptation. And hopefully in a few years when we get back on stage, when you're lean enough to tell, you can be like, I'm making 163 look a lot better than I made 161 look last season. And people don't like to hear that because the bodybuilding culture is so much steeped in what do your arms measure, how much body weight do you have, what are you carrying right now, But as someone who's been lifting weights for 12 years now, I kind of go, I'm holding 210 pretty good right now. This is maybe 12% body fat. I think last time I was 210, I was probably more like 15, and that was 3-4 years ago. Okay, that's good. You know, so it's a very different perspective than when it was 2006, and I was, making progress in the weight room every week on the bar, and also intentionally gaining 2-3 pounds a month. So it's difficult to let go of that because that was when you made your biggest gains. That's why I think so many guys do the bulk when they know it's probably not going to work, and they do the dreamer bulk multiple repeated times, and it just gets like progressively less effective,
Well, I think a lot of it carries over from the enhanced side of bodybuilding because that actually works very well for
correct. If you
guys.
Do it also with increasing the dosage, then that's great. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If I recall correctly, Kai Green between the 2007 and 2008 competition seasons gained like 27 pounds of stage weight.
Something like that.
And so, just imagine the quantity of surely he gained 50 plus pounds, in that intervening off season. Worked incredibly. Now, if he weren't, for one thing, absolute genetic elite, but also,
Little thing people don't know about Kai Green, when he was 18 and 19, he won every WNBF pro title as a teenager. And then after that, after he mopped up everyone in natural body, he was like, I want a challenge, then he went and won his pro card at Team Universe. IFBB pro card at Team Universe, and then he got on stage 50 pounds heavier.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Skittles.
So you want to know one of the best natural bodybuilders that ever existed, we're talking about teenage Kai Green, in my opinion.
Interesting. So. I knew that he had done that, but I hadn't thought about it from that
He doesn't even talk about it anymore, That was like the farm leagues for him,
Yeah. Yeah, it's totally unremarkable, one of the best bodybuilders in the world, so he doesn't care about having, been...
Yeah, WNBF World, they only give you like $2,000.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So to be clear, is your view that doing a very deliberate slow bulk, let's say, everything tracked, gaining, aiming to gain exactly 1 pound per month, long term, et cetera, is, equivalent in efficacy to a more relaxed approach? Or is your view, okay, maybe it's better, but it's not so much better that it justifies all of that additional expense in the sense of, the time and energy that you put into it? Do you think that perhaps a very strict approach is plausibly, who knows, 5% better, but that isn't...
So if we define strict by I'm hitting macros every day and I'm trying to gain a very specific amount of weight on a week-to-week basis.
Yes, exactly.
No, I don't think it's better. I think it would actually be worse because you're trying to control variables that you actually can't and creating frustration, and you're going to be chasing ghosts. Because, like, if we actually talk about the goal of gaining, 1 pound a month, we're talking about a quarter pound a week, and I've looked at 7-day and 14-day averages with clients for 7 years, and I know what the standard error on that is, and that's within the standard error. So when I look back and I look at 14 to maybe 3-week averages or even a month of weigh-ins, and I go, all right, is this trending the way I want it to? So if you're trying to track things on a day-to-day basis and your body weight goes up a pound on average that week, and then you adjust your calories down, you might be putting yourself in a deficit when you think you're in a surplus, just because those fluctuations are more than you can possibly know, because there's too many things that go into what spits out on the scale. I try to control that as much as I can without putting an undue burden on the person. Like I go, okay, first thing in the morning, be nude, get out of bed, use the bathroom, don't eat or drink anything, step on the scale. We do that every day. I really don't want you to focus on that number, and sometimes that doesn't work. That's, creates a problem with that person psychologically. And just write down the number in the spreadsheet, and we'll have a running 7-day average, right? And I can make that a 14, I can make it a 10-day, and do whatever I want with the data, right? And that gives me really reliable data, but it doesn't give me reliable data enough to be able to be like, and I can tell that you gained 0.1 pound that is definitely, lean body mass.
Right.
No. So you would end up chasing ghosts and making worse decisions than if you were to take an approach that puts you in as much as we know can be the ballpark of optimal. And then making sure that all the things that we talked about previously, making progress in the weight room is happening, and getting all those kind of auto-regulated elements of your diet in place. Like I know I'm getting at least, let's say, 1.8 grams per kilogram of protein. I know that I'm within the rough ranges of carbs and fat that I've habitually been on that have worked well for me. I'm eating, an appropriate amount of meals per day. I'm making sure that I roughly, of course, 6 to 8. Yeah, that I'm roughly getting, my protein spread between meals. I'm having protein near my workout. I'm nailing down all the things that we think might have some measurable impact. I'm taking my creatine, that type of thing. And then, okay, I'm also gaining a pound a month when we look back after we have a month of data. And if not, okay, let's add 20, 30 grams of carbohydrate or 10 grams of fat or whatever. Or just if you're doing calories, or if you're not even tracking, then you go, I want you to be a little more full at your meals.
Right.
It's going to be, the end result is going to be roughly the same thing, but one is going to be a lot more stressful and making you make adjustments you don't need to make.
Right, so I think we're getting to something that I think you and Alan, more than anyone in my experience, really emphasize, which is, simplicity, adherence, identify the variables that, based on the best available evidence, are likely to make the biggest difference, and then maybe not, ignore everything else, but don't put, tremendous amount of time and energy into it. And so one concern I have is, how do you draw that line? What is the thinking that goes into deciding, okay, this might make this much of a difference, but this isn't worth thinking about. This is worth thinking about. And
is the burden on the person clearly worse than the potential benefit? It's that simple. And that's actually a performance-based decision when you think about it.
Right.
So a great example would be, we don't have that great of data that says definitively that protein post-workout gives an additional benefit. But is it really hard to have protein after your workout?
Right.
Within 1 to 2 hours? Like, go eat lunch, or if you train late, go eat dinner. Or if you're training in the morning, just have a whey shake beforehand and then eat breakfast. Like, it's such an easy thing to do. And sure, like if you look at the meta-analysis that Alan did, almost all the studies are on the right of having a benefit. It's just they barely reach significance and you got these big error bars. It's not going to be harmful. I mean, I can't think of any possible way it could be harmful. And it's not a difficult thing for ask to someone to, do you think you can have some of your protein post-workout, at least 0.4 grams per kilogram?
Right.
Easy, right? Or an example would be, there may be something not necessarily optimal about, gaining muscle mass if we have way too little of a meal frequency. If it's at least 3, I'm happy. Probably no more than 6, or I don't see that being, good, or potentially maybe be refractory. So let's roughly try to eat roughly even spread between 3 to 6 meals. Oh, you want to do intermittent fasting that helps you adhere? Okay, can you just simply have a protein shake at some point, maybe post-workout or pre-workout, or maybe BCA if that's what you want to do,
Scam artist.
Right. So I mean, so long as they're getting at least a certain number of protein boluses, that's another example of that's a very easy thing. There's no real potential cost to that. Mm-hmm. But if we're talking about the hypothetical benefit of having a very, very strict, meal schedule, refeed regimen, all this stuff, and you're manipulating thousands of variables, largely, once you get down to nitpicking every single tiny little thing, you're largely operating off supposition. You're taking the research we have and then going, well, if this mechanism is true, and then that affects that one that way, and then this one this way, then I can make the logical leap to say that, it would be best to have these very low calorie days on these days because of the intermittent calorie restriction diets, and very ones on high on this one. Then since we went low here, then we should go high protein, and then don't train on that day. We'll just train on this day. We should only refeed on this day because of you're making like ever increasing numbers of leaps.
Right.
And you have to be making errors somewhere along the way. And at the cost of asking someone to track and maintain control over so many things, that I think the overall net cost of doing all that nonsense is worse than the potential benefit.
Do you think it's ever appropriate to do that? Let's say you have a client who they're Android, basically. I mean, you could tell them to eat 16 times a day and they would do it unfailingly. Yeah. You could specify at this meal you have to consume 71 grams of carbs, and they would do
I get a lot of androids. I mean, don't forget, I'm a bodybuilding coach. People are willing to do all kinds of crazy shit. I like to free them up to put that energy into other places, to then bring back that healthiness relationship in their family, or to have a social life. I think that's valuable. I think it makes everything better. However, the thing about research, and that was a tangent, and we'll bring it back. The thing about research is it's very difficult to make conclusions about a whole population.
Right.
Once you've actually started doing research, you see that individual results are all over the place. And if you consistently see an individual result with a client, man, you really operate well on X macronutrient breakdown. Sure, I want you to track calories, but I really want you to keep a cap on your carbs at 200. I'm making a random example, but you can get from over time of working with someone and seeing the way things change. And once you understand that research only tells you what 2 standard deviations from the mean will respond well to,
right.
That you then can go, right, so this is what I'm pretty damn sure is effective for you, and we're going to keep it in there. And I'll use a personal example. Repeated times I've found that a large and frequent refeed schedule for me makes a noticeable difference over the course of prep in terms of fat loss and being able to keep my calories higher throughout.
Right.
I don't think that's true of everyone. It's just, for whatever reason, that seems to be true for me. That's something I had to go through 7 shows to learn. And I will always do that because I know it's better for me. So I have probably more nitpicky bullshit OCD-ness to the way I might have my nutrition set up than I might have for one of my clients. Or I might have someone with the same amount but different.
Right, so I actually have 3 questions. Feel free to pick whichever you find most interesting or answer all 3. The first is, have you ever had anyone say to you, you know what, Eric, frankly, I don't care about socializing. I hate my family. I mean, you mentioned being a serial killer. I killed my whole family. They were uninteresting to me and so on.
Yeah.
I only want to do bodybuilding.
Yeah.
And if so, what do you do with that? Another question is...
Call the cops. No, go ahead. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'll invite them over to dinner. Second question was... What do you do when there seems to be a conflict between what the literature says and what seems to be working? And then the third question is, just getting into refeeds. It's actually a 2-part question, so I'm just really piling it on
So you
here.
2 questions and a third 2-parter.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So it's just a test to see if you can even remember the questions.
Okay.
With regard to refeeding, can you speculate as to a mechanism, that underlies the success of refeeding, given, when you actually look at the literature on massive carbohydrate overfeeding, I haven't seen anything that makes me go, that's why refeeding works. You see a transient increase in leptin, but it's how would that translate into
I remember
fat
talking to you
loss
about
and
this
all
when we weren't on camera with the discussion you and Alan and I had. But I won't interrupt you because it's a 2-parter.
Yes, the second.
That's a second part.
The
Go ahead.
second part is, does it even matter? Do we even need to know the mechanism? Should we seek out to discover the mechanism? Is it of significance?
All kinds of good questions. Let's start at the beginning. So let's say I've got the android who doesn't really. He's like, dude, I love bodybuilding. I want to do it perfect. Right. The question is, are you happy? If the answer is yes, we go with it. We can be as neurotic as you want to be. if it's not working for you, I mean, that's the classic question about life. Is this working for you?
Right.
A lot of bodybuilders, the answer is no. It's working for bodybuilding, but they're burning themselves out in other ways. Or I ask them, do you feel like you have enough energy to give to training, or do you have things dragging you down? Can we improve the whole system better?
Right.
If you just got to get them to be a little bit more big picture, and then they can evaluate it and go, oh, if I wasn't as stressed about my diet, maybe I could sleep better or whatever. So if everything's working great and it's fine to control a whole bunch of things, then I will tell them, I will give them additional structure within the guidelines of what I think works if that helps them. Some people thrive off a lot of structure, I used to use this example of you get two guys who have OCD, and the one goes to his therapist and he goes, I'm doing great. I've come to accept it. I flip the light switch on 5 times and I go into my house. The therapist goes, great, awesome. I'll see you next week, George. Tom comes in right afterward and goes, I feel like I'm a slave to this thing. I have to come into my house, and before I can even walk in my house, I have to flip the light on 5 times.
Right.
It's the same fucking behavior, but it's one person is accepting it, it's fine, and it's not creating drama for them. The other person, not so much. So you would treat that differently, right? You wouldn't just be like, oh no, you have a problem, and you have to turn it on 5 seconds. Like, dude, that takes 5 times, takes 5 seconds. Like, why do we even care?
Right.
You're happy, you're doing fine. The light comes off a few times, it freaks out the cat, and whatever. So that's answered the first question. Okay. Second question was, I don't remember the second question. I remember the first and third.
Perceived, excellent. So that's 2 out of 3.
2 out of 3, and then one's a 2-parter, so we'll say 3 out of 4.
Oh, yeah, all right. I'll give that to you. It's still a C though, so hey.
C+.
Perceived tension between the scientific evidence
and great question.
Direct experience.
Yeah, and that actually feeds into that part about the mechanism. So often I just go with what works. It doesn't happen too much because I start from, I start with the broad literature and informing the broad strokes. That's where I get my guidelines for macronutrients, my rough calorie setting, the assumptions I have about thermodynamics, all those kind of things guide my decision. And then if it's just really not working for somebody, then I go, well, fuck, what's some of the anecdotal evidence out there that could help? Maybe this person does need to be on a ketogenic diet. Sure, let's try it. Right. Sometimes, and what happens more often than not is I exhaust my thoughts about trying other random shit before the person gets tired and goes, this isn't working for me, Eric. And I go, you're right. Please go somewhere else. Hopefully they'll be able to help you.
Right.
That has happened to me a few times. They always stand out because I feel like I've failed the person. But it's also, you don't get all the information. You don't really know if the person is following everything you're saying. Like, I've literally heard of people who wake up in the middle of the night and they're like, oh my God, I've been eating peanut butter in my sleep. Like, it's not exactly a lab-controlled environment. It's not like I got my clients in a metabolic ward, so I don't know if everything's being followed. So I try to create a very non-judgmental environment so that someone can come to me and go, I haven't been able to follow the protocol. A lot of the times you set up an environment, especially with a very rigid and authoritarian coaching method, if those two things combine, then you're going to get people who just drop off and you just blame it on them because you don't know if they're following it, and they won't tell you because they don't feel like they can, and that's on you just as much as them. It's like, you weren't honest with me. It's like, well, you're Hitler of macros, so if I tell you I was over 5 grams of my protein, you get mad at me.
Right, I mean, it takes 2 to tango.
Right.
If as a coach you're a raging asshole,
correct,
and your client makes everyone makes mistakes, even, well, actually, I think I do have one client who has never not hit her macros, but that's one.
Which some could say is a mistake.
Pardon?
Which some could categorize as a mistake in and of itself.
But she's happy with it.
There you go.
She seems extremely
So she's
content,
your 5 light switch girl. Okay.
But even when you look at really disciplined professional bodybuilders, they typically have the one binge in their prep or something. Yeah. So if as a coach you're like, well, this is very disappointing. Yeah. Why aren't you taking this seriously? It's like, okay, this person is starving every single day, is just moving is a struggle. Like bathing. Do you know of Josh Vogel?
Yeah.
So he was telling me at the Olympia, I hope he doesn't mind me telling the story. He near the end of his prep, he did, I think it was Junior USA's last year and did very well. He said that he was just so exhausted that it took everything in his power to just get up, put on like sweatpants and a sweatshirt and go train. Because he didn't even have the energy to put on any other clothes. So it's like, yes, realistically, someone,
I didn't shave for 2 weeks one time. I didn't fucking feel like holding the thing for that long in front of my
Right.
face. I get it. Yeah.
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 So yeah, if as a coach, you give someone a huge amount of flack for being human,
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think the likely outcome is going to be? Like it has to be okay for someone to mess up, and then when they do, they will tell you, and then ultimately that allows you to improve that situation. So this actually gets to a question that
No, we haven't answered the other 2.5.
can we leave the refeed question to the side for the moment?
We can leave the refeed, yeah. Yeah. So we're
just-
talking about still what to do if it doesn't match evidence, but yeah, go ahead.
Right. Well, I think the discussion has kind of slowly shifted to the question of adherence and
Yeah.
is this client actually doing what I'm saying and so on. So with
Well-
regard to adherence, let's say you have a client who clearly makes an effort. They're taking it seriously, but they really struggle. Every day they're significantly off of their macros. Maybe they miss enough weigh-ins that it's probably skewing the accuracy of the resulting average and things like this. This is also a two-part question, so I apologize. But how do you move someone from, say, a 5 to an 8 or a 9? And without wanting to be pessimistic, are there people who are fundamentally uncoachable? Like 15 of the greatest coaches on the planet work together to coach them, and they just can't do it.
To be honest, I've gotten some people that have told me they've had 4 or 5 coaches, and I'm always like, oh shit. Like they've had a lot of coaches before me, and they're like, they all just don't. I think sometimes you have to have not the numbers at that point. The numbers aren't that important. You have to have that kind of the come to Jesus moment, if you will, like the life realization of there's a fundamental issue with the way you're approaching your fitness or your bodybuilding goals that is not working.
Right.
And here are my speculations and this is something I'd preferably do on Skype or record a video of me saying it to them so it doesn't come off as like dick,
Yeah.
But so I basically say like things are not adding up. There's some fundamental issues here. I don't think you can see it. The best thing I can do as a coach who wants to help you is to kind of make you aware of this. You're probably not going to want to hear this, but X, Y, and Z, I think, is why you're not getting results. It's going to take a large change or a large amount of effort, maybe more than most people have to do, and you have to accept that. We need to really, like, whatever it may be, whether it is, I think it would actually behoove you to work with a therapist in conjunction with me.
Right.
Or I think it would behoove you to, work with maybe a dietitian, or I can think of a few instances where I had to tell the person, look, there's nothing I can do to help you until you fix X. Mm-hmm. That's often the situation where that is for me. Do I think it's a fundamental issue with people? No, I think people can change. I think I'm uncomfortable saying that there are fundamental flaws with people.
Right.
I'm the optimist who thinks if Hitler was born into a different family, he'd be a nice guy.
He wanted to be a painter.
There you go. See, and they just let him paint.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
It's really their fault.
Yeah, exactly. But so, I don't know. But I guess that would be my answer to that question. Yeah.
So, what is your general approach to someone who's struggling with adherence? Let's assume you're not at the point where where it's apparent they need to do something radically different. They don't just need a physique coach. They need a psychologist. They need to get a divorce.
Okay. They're just somebody really struggling with tracking, or really struggling with the guidelines I set up for them. Right. That's when you have to modify your guidelines as a coach, or think, is this? Sometimes I have to set boundaries with people. I like, to be honest. Here's the things we would have to do. Honestly, I'm not willing to do that, because that would be so much more time and effort, more than the value of what I signed up for, I can't come into your home and teach you how to cook or something like that. I'm trying to think of examples. It's not a common thing for sure. Most of the time it's just, hey, can we get on Skype? Can you explain to me specifically what is the barrier here, why you're off by 150 grams on your carbs? What is going on in your life? What is it that is why can't you get on the scale? Because maybe there's something I completely don't understand about your life where you don't fit into the mold of my regular client. Like, you're a flight attendant who never has access to a scale, or I can't. I'm trying to think of examples. It often doesn't happen because we have a large filtering process for people people don't even hear about me unless they're interested in like evidence-based natural bodybuilding. So that's, so I mean, it has happened more when I was a personal trainer, and you really have to get into that's when you have to get creative, because you in my opinion, a really good coach builds systems to organized, doing things in a structured way based on evidence that produces reproducible results, right? So if your whole system and all your experience that you've created this funnel of progress through, they can't even enter it, then you have to start from scratch. All of your experience as a coach is almost not helpful. Or at least the systems you built on that experience are no longer helpful. You have to get creative on the spot. Think of, well, fuck, what's the situation or system I create for Jane? Or, she doesn't fit into my mold. Or you decide, Jane, I'm not the best coach for you. My systems aren't working for that. Here's what I think you need. I have actually had to tell a client, you know what, I really just don't think the online coaching thing is going to work for you.
Right.
There was so many issues with communication. And I'd like to think I do a pretty good job with communication, but I really think this person needed someone who could really tell based on her email, this person's email, so I already outed her gender, damn it, who could tell based on what they were saying, what they needed, and I just think it needed to be in person. There was the subtleties and the nuances and then the emotional swings. It wasn't like I thought this person needed a therapist, but I definitely didn't think the tool that was being used to fix the problem was appropriate.
Right.
So I told her, hey, you're not going to succeed with me. I don't think, not to make myself feel better, I don't think it's going to succeed with any online coach. I just think whoever it is, no matter what they do, to be successful, they need one-on-one interaction with you in person. That's an example.
Right. So how far do you feel you're obligated to go as a coach before you say, you know what, this is too much? It would be unfair to me to have to do this. It would be unfair to my other clients.
Yeah. It's like any other relationship. You've got to decide whether what you have to invest is worth it, And I want to love my job, And if I have a client who every time I see the report come in, I'm dreading it, eventually I'll just go, this isn't working for me. I'm happy to refund you this month, but and try to tell them as compassionately as possible that this isn't clicking with me. And if I think maybe they could work with one of the other 4 coaches, awesome. Well, I think they would work better for you. I think the trick more often is to do it before I'm pissed. Like if I get to the point where and it's really my own fault. If I keep someone on, it's just like staying in a relationship way longer than you should have when you should have broke up with them. You develop so much resentment that when it finally happens, it's like, you were the worst, I want you to die, get off my road. I've never said that, obviously, but right. It doesn't come off nearly as empathetic as it should or as it could had you jumped on it from the start of this, like for example, if you give them a specific reporting day and it really messes up your schedule every time they don't report on that day, and you're supposed to get back to them in 24 hours, and you start having to manipulate your life to get back to them, and really you should have just been like, hey, we need to make sure we have it on that reporting day, or we need to change days. But if you by your action, you give them indication that they can report anywhere from Monday to Wednesday, and you need them to report on Monday, but you let it happen, that's not their fault. Even though you might have said it in that first client email, that is just as much your fault as theirs.
Right. Okay, so returning to the refeed question. You have 5 minutes, so this is really a test.
Done. So I think 2 things are happening with refeeds. I think one is that during prep and the high stresses of it, especially with certain people, there is a lot of water retention that happens, and refeeds stimulate letting go of that. Mm-hmm. I do also think it's more than just water.
Right.
And I think a lot of it is probably a downstream effect. Leptin might go up, but leptin affects so many things, and the increase in leptin is not that much. If there's a downstream effect that influences hormonal levels, that influences NEAT, for example, over the course of, like maybe you get this kind of delayed effect increase in NEAT that lasts and tapers off. It may be affecting kind of like gross energy expenditure over a week or something like that, and we just don't have, we haven't had the effective way to study that over time. I would agree that the acute increases in TDEE are almost seeming inconsequential, even if you took them out over a whole prep.
Right.
But there are also a lot of other effects, like I think you can delay amenorrhea in women by doing refeeds. There's some pretty good data on like LH and things like that. And then the effect of being in that state in a woman can have downstream negative effects on her ability to maintain muscle mass, lose fat, et cetera, handle macronutrients and substrate utilization in different ways. And you would think there would be some correlate in men related to their sexual reproduction. They don't necessarily have a hormonal cycle related to releasing an egg, obviously, but
right, not necessarily.
Maybe not. I don't know. It depends. Yeah, but I do think that it would probably be downstream related effects. And then the question of do we even need to know the mechanisms? I'd say yes and no. from a coaching perspective of figuring out what do I want to do with my person, no, it doesn't really matter. From trying to improve on our protocols 3 or 4 years from now, I'm an applied researcher. I don't get in there and cut up little muscles or measure muscle protein synthesis like Phillips. I take bodybuilders and powerlifters, I tell them to do something, I come back and I measure what changed, and then we fine tune our stuff, and then I speculate on the mechanism. But if we don't actually understand the mechanism, then we can't necessarily improve upon the method we're using to modify it. Like if we never knew that leptin was modified by carbohydrates, we wouldn't, more than fat, we wouldn't have a carbohydrate-based refeed. And regardless of whether that ends up being the best way to do it or not, we can't build a protocol on something unless we know what we're actually manipulating. So we can't improve on things. We can just say, when I do this, this happens, you know. But it makes us much more, it's like a shotgun approach versus having a finely tuned target that we're trying to modify.
Excellent.
Pretty good for 5 minutes? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time.
Ian, good to meet you in person for the first time, yeah?
Yeah, you too. It's a huge honor. And it's a huge honor for you to meet me.
I think it should be a huge honor for you to meet me, yeah.